The taxi hadn't even turned the corner when I noticed something was wrong. At first, it was small, subtle. The way silence hung differently around the house, like it no longer recognized me. I stood there with my purse in one hand and my suitcase in the other, staring at the front door of the home I had lived in for 32 years. The curtains were drawn. The porch light, always left on for me, was off. And then I saw it. My things. Not just a bag or two. Everything. 3 suitcases, a couple of cardboard boxes, and the old leather carry-on I'd had since my 40s were lined up neatly along the edge of the driveway. Too neatly. Like someone had taken time to arrange them. Like they wanted me to notice. For a moment, I thought I was at the wrong house. But no. The crack in the 3rd step was still there. The oak tree I planted when my son was 10 still leaned slightly to the left. The wind chime I bought on a vacation years ago still hung by the porch, though it didn't ring now. My hand moved slowly toward the doorknob. Locked. That alone didn't scare me. What did was the fact that my key didn't work. I tried again, pressing harder this time, like force could somehow make metal remember me. Nothing. Just a stubborn, unfamiliar resistance. That's when I noticed the envelope tucked under one of the suitcase handles. My name was written on it. Anna. No, Mama. No words. Just my name, sharp and plain. I already knew who it was from before I opened it. The handwriting confirmed it. Claire. My daughter-in-law. The message inside was short. We've made some changes. It's better this way. Your space is in the basement now. Please don't make this difficult. I read it 3 times. Each time slower. Each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less cruel. They didn't. I stood there, feeling the air press against me like it was trying to push me away too. A car passed down the street, and I suddenly became aware of how I must look. An older woman standing beside a pile of luggage like she'd been dropped off and forgotten. Or worse, removed. My phone felt heavy in my hand when I pulled it out. I didn't call my son right away. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I called the bank. Hello, this is Anna Carter. I just need to confirm something about a mortgage account. My voice sounded steady. Too steady. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of typing. Yes, Miss Carter. I see your account. The payment of $1,942 was processed 5 days ago. Of course it was. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said quietly. So nothing had changed there. I was still paying. Still responsible. Just no longer welcome. A cold drop of rain hit my cheek, and then another. Within seconds, the sky opened, soaking everything. The bags, the boxes, me. I didn't move. I just stood there and let it happen. It felt fitting somehow, like the world understood something I didn't. Eventually, I dragged the suitcases toward the side entrance. My hands shook, but not from the cold. From something deeper. Something I didn't want to name yet. The basement door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the smell hit me first, damp concrete and dust. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting uneven light across the room. And there it was, my space. A narrow bed pushed against the wall. A folding table. A plastic bin with my clothes thrown inside. No photos. No books. No sign that a life had ever existed here. Just storage. That's what I had been reduced to. Storage. I sat on the edge of the bed slowly, afraid it might collapse under the weight of everything I was feeling. My hands rested on my knees as I looked around, trying to make sense of it. This house. I remembered choosing the kitchen tiles, arguing over paint colors, holding my husband's hand in the doorway the day we moved in, watching my son take his first steps in the living room upstairs. And now I wasn't even allowed to stand in it. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. My son, you saw the note. Let's talk later. Please don't cause a scene. Don't cause a scene. I stared at the words until they blurred. A laugh escaped me then, quiet, almost unrecognizable. A scene? Was that what this was to him? Not betrayal, not abandonment, just inconvenience. I typed a response, then deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, I put the phone face down beside me and said nothing, because for the first time in a long time,
I didn't know what to say.
or maybe I did, and I wasn't ready to say it yet. The rain above grew louder, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Somewhere upstairs, I heard footsteps, muffled voices, life continuing without me. I lay back on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Something inside me shifted. Not broke. Shifted. Slowly. Quietly. But unmistakably. They thought this was the end of something. They were wrong. It was the beginning. I didn't sleep that night, not really. My eyes closed a few times, but my mind refused to follow. Every creak of the house above me felt like a reminder that life was continuing just fine without me in it, like I had already been erased, and the walls were adjusting to my absence. By morning, my back ached from the thin mattress, and the damp chill of the basement had settled into my bones. But it wasn't the discomfort that kept me awake. It was the realization that everything I had tolerated over the past 2 years had led exactly to this moment. At first, after my husband died, I thought the changes were temporary. Daniel and Claire had moved in to help, or at least that's how they framed it. Claire said it would be easier for everyone if they shared the space, especially with their jobs and the baby coming. I had agreed because it felt like the right thing to do, because family helps family, because I didn't want to be alone in a house filled with memories that echoed too loudly at night. But somewhere along the way, the balance shifted so quietly that I barely noticed it happening. My kitchen became her kitchen. My routines became inconveniences. My presence became something to work around rather than include. First, it was small comments, suggestions really about how I could relax more or let them take over. Then came the rearranging, the quiet decisions made without me, the subtle relocation of my belongings to less visible spaces. And now, here I was literally moved underground like something that needed to be stored out of sight. I sat up slowly, pulling my sweater tighter around me as the early light filtered weakly through the tiny basement window. For a long time, I just stared at my hands. These same hands had built a life in this house, had cooked thousands of meals, had held my son when he cried, had paid bill after bill without fail. And yet, somehow, none of that seemed to matter anymore. The thought should have broken me completely, but instead, something else was growing in its place. Something unfamiliar, something sharper. Not sadness. Not exactly. It was closer to clarity. I reached for my phone again, half expecting another message from Daniel, but there was nothing new. That somehow felt worse. It meant he had said what he needed to say already. It meant, in his mind, the situation was settled. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, ignoring the stiffness in my joints. If they thought I would quietly accept this, they clearly didn't remember who I used to be. Or maybe they had never really known. I didn't go upstairs right away. Instead, I gathered a few things, my purse, my documents, the small folder where I kept financial records. Habit.
Discipline.
My husband had always insisted on keeping everything organized, and for years I had followed his system without question. Now, it might be the only thing standing between me and complete helplessness. I flipped through the papers, confirming what I already knew. Every payment, every transfer, every month of support I had continued to provide long after the house was no longer legally mine. It was all there, neat and undeniable. When I finally pushed open the basement door and stepped into the main house, it felt like walking into a stranger's home. The air smelled different, lighter, artificial, like one of those scented candles Claire loved. The furniture had been rearranged again. My favorite chair was gone entirely this time. replaced by something modern and uncomfortable looking. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it in, letting the reality settle fully into place. Claire was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone with a cup of coffee in hand. She looked up when she heard me, her expression flickering with something between surprise and annoyance before settling into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're up," she said, as if I were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. "I was going to come check on you later." "I'm fine," I replied, my voice calm, almost detached. It surprised even me. She nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't immediately causing a scene, as Daniel had put it. "Good. I think this arrangement will actually be better for everyone once you get used to it. The basement gives you your own space, and we really need the upstairs for the baby and Daniel's work setup." I watched her as she spoke, noting the casual certainty in her tone. She truly believed this was reasonable. That was the most astonishing part. Not the cruelty, but the normalization of it. "Where is Daniel?" I asked. "He left early. Big meeting," she said, already turning her attention back to her phone. "We can all talk tonight, though." Calmly.
Calmly.
The word lingered in my mind as I turned away from her and walked through the house. Each room felt like a version of itself that had been slightly altered, like a memory that didn't quite match reality anymore. When I reached the front door, I paused, my hand resting on the handle. For a second, I considered staying, playing along, waiting for the calm conversation. But something inside me rejected that idea immediately. Instead, I opened the door and stepped outside. The air was cool, fresh, real. I inhaled deeply, as if I had been holding my breath for months, without realizing it. My suitcases were still there, damp from the rain, but intact. I picked up the smallest one first, then the others. Loading them slowly into the trunk of a passing taxi, I flagged down without hesitation. "Where to?" the driver asked. I hesitated for just a moment. Then I said the first place that came to mind. "My friend's house." As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. Not at the house. Not at the door that no longer opened for me. I simply watched the street ahead, feeling something shift again inside my chest, this time stronger, more defined. My phone buzzed almost immediately. "Daniel, where are you going?" I stared at the message for a second, then typed my response carefully.
"Away."
The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. I turned the phone off before he could send anything else. For years, I had shaped my life around being needed, around being useful, around being present for everyone else, even when it meant shrinking parts of myself to fit their expectations. But sitting there in the back of that taxi, with everything I owned packed behind me and no clear plan ahead, I realized something they had completely overlooked. I didn't need their permission to start over. And more importantly, I didn't owe them my silence anymore. Margaret didn't ask questions when she opened the door. She didn't look surprised to see me standing there with 2 suitcases and a face that probably said more than I was willing to admit. She simply stepped aside, like she had done 100 times before in smaller moments of my life, and said, "Come in, Anna," in that steady, grounding voice of hers. That was all it took. Not sympathy, not curiosity, just space. Real space. The kind I hadn't realized I'd been missing until I crossed her threshold and felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in days. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old books, a combination that instantly pulled me back to years of shared afternoons and conversations that had nothing to do with responsibility or obligation. I set my bags down near the hallway and stood there awkwardly for a second, unsure of what to do next. It felt strange to arrive somewhere without a role to play, without something expected of me. Margaret must have sensed it because she placed a hand lightly on my shoulder and guided me toward the kitchen without a word, pouring tea into a mug she didn't even need to ask if I still preferred. Some things, at least, hadn't changed. We sat across from each other at the small wooden table, and for a while, I just held the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. I kept thinking that once I started talking, everything would come pouring out uncontrollably, that I would fall apart in a way I wouldn't be able to stop. But that didn't happen. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, measured, almost distant, like I was telling someone else's story instead of my own. I told her about the suitcases, the note, the basement, about the lock that no longer recognized my key. I told her about Daniel's message, about Claire's calm explanation, about the way everything had been decided without me even being present. Margaret didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp or shake her head or fill the silence with outrage the way most people would. She just listened, her expression steady, her eyes sharp in that way that meant she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and crossed her arms, not in judgment, but in thought. "So," she said finally, "they believe the house is theirs. They legally own it," I replied, the word tasting bitter. "I signed it over after David died. It seemed like the right thing at the time." "And yet," she continued, tilting her head slightly, "you've been the one paying for it." I nodded. "For 2 years." She let out a slow breath, tapping her fingers lightly against the table. "And they think they can just move you to the basement and carry on as if that's acceptable." "They don't think," I said quietly. "That's the problem. They've convinced themselves this is normal." Margaret's gaze sharpened.
No, Anna.
"They've convinced themselves you won't fight back." The words landed harder than anything else had so far. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true in a way I couldn't deny. For years, I hadn't fought back. I had adjusted, adapted, softened my reactions, convinced myself that keeping peace was more important than asserting boundaries. I had told myself it was temporary, that things would settle, that Daniel would eventually remember who I was to him beyond just being convenient. But peace, I realize now, had come at a cost, and I was the one who had been paying it. "What do I even do now?" I asked, the question coming out more tired than defeated. Margaret didn't hesitate. "First, you stop paying for a house that you're not allowed to live in." "I already did," I said. A small, approving smile appeared on her face. "Good. That's step 1. Step 2 is understanding exactly what leverage you have." "Leverage," I repeated, unfamiliar with the word in relation to my own life. "Yes, leverage," she said firmly. "You've been funding their lifestyle. That's not something you just walk away from without consequences for them, not you." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. For so long, I had seen myself as the one at a disadvantage, the one who had lost control. But Margaret was framing it differently, shifting the perspective in a way that made something inside me sit up straighter. "They need you more than you think," she added. Before I could respond, my phone lit up on the table. Daniel's name flashed across the screen, followed by a string of missed calls I hadn't noticed earlier. Then another message appeared. "Mom, this isn't funny. The bank called." "What did you do?" I showed the screen to Margaret. She read it, then looked back at me with a knowing expression.
"There it is," she said.
Reality. I felt something stir in my chest again, that same unfamiliar strength that had begun to take shape the moment I left the house. This time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt steady. "I didn't answer him," I said. "Good," Margaret replied. "Let him sit with it for a while. He needs to understand that actions have consequences, just like everyone else." I picked up my phone, staring at the message. For years, I would have responded immediately, trying to smooth things over, to explain, to reassure. But now I saw it differently. He wasn't reaching out because he cared about where I was or how I felt. He was reaching out because something had disrupted his comfort. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to.
It clarified things.
"I think I need to talk to a lawyer," I said slowly. Margaret nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. I know someone, my nephew, actually. He deals with cases like this more often than you'd think. Cases like this? I echoed. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Families taking advantage of the person who built everything? Unfortunately, it's not rare. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing that. For the first time since everything happened, I didn't feel isolated in my situation. That didn't make it easier, but it made it less confusing, less surreal. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. You can't just stop paying, Mom. We have plans.
Plans.
I typed a response this time, my fingers moving slowly, but deliberately. So do I. I stared at the words for a moment before pressing send. It wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. But it was the first time I had responded to him without trying to fix something, without trying to make things easier for him at my own expense. Margaret watched me carefully, then nodded once, as if confirming something she had already suspected. There she is, she said softly.
Who?
I asked. The woman they forgot they were dealing with. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked down at my hands again, the same hands I had studied that morning in the basement. They didn't look different. Nothing about me physically had changed. And yet, everything felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. And that, I realized, was something they had never planned for. Brian Cole didn't look like the kind of lawyer who handled family disputes. He wore a simple dark sweater instead of a suit jacket, his sleeves slightly rolled up, his office more modest than I expected. Bookshelves, a wooden desk, no unnecessary decorations. But the moment he started speaking, I understood why Margaret trusted him. He didn't waste words, and more importantly, he didn't soften the truth. He sat across from me, reviewing the documents I had brought, bank statements, payment confirmations, records going back 2 full years. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of paper shifting and the occasional note he scribbled down. I watched him carefully, trying to read his expression, trying to guess what he was thinking before he said it out loud. It felt strange to have my life laid out in numbers and dates, reduced to transactions that somehow carried more weight than memories. So, he said finally, placing the papers neatly in front of him, you've been making consistent mortgage payments on a property that is no longer in your name, and you've been excluded from full use of that property. Yes, I answered, my voice steady. And recently, you've been effectively removed from the main living space and relocated to the basement without your consent. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Yes. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands together. That gives us room to work. The phrase caught my attention immediately. Room to work. Not sympathy. Not disbelief. Possibility. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Brian continued, that while you may not be on the title, your financial contributions over an extended period could establish what's called an equitable interest. In simple terms, you've been investing in that property, and the law doesn't always ignore that. I felt something shift inside me again, that same cautious sense of control returning. So I have a claim? You have leverage, he corrected calmly. And in situations like this, leverage is often more useful than ownership on paper. Margaret, who had been sitting quietly beside me, let out a small, satisfied breath. That's what I told her. Brian nodded slightly, but kept his focus on me. The key here is timing and pressure. If they plan to sell the house, your involvement complicates that. If they can't resolve your claim, it can delay or even block the sale entirely. I thought about Daniel's message again, we have plans. I imagine those plans now, suddenly unstable, dependent on something they no longer controlled as easily as they thought. What are my options? I asked. Brian didn't hesitate. Several. You can pursue reimbursement for every payment you've made. You can place a formal lien on the property. Or, he paused briefly, studying my reaction, you can negotiate terms that benefit you directly. Negotiate. I repeated, the word unfamiliar in my mouth. Yes, he said. This doesn't have to be a courtroom battle. It can be a controlled conversation on your terms. That part mattered. On my terms. For years, every conversation in that house had happened on someone else's terms. Every compromise had leaned in one direction. The idea that I could now set the conditions felt almost unreal. I want to talk to them first, I said after a moment. Margaret glanced at me, but didn't object. Brian considered it, then nodded slowly. That's reasonable. But you don't go alone, and you don't go unprepared. I won't, I said. And I meant it. The meeting was set for the next afternoon. Daniel responded almost immediately when I suggested it, his message shorter this time, less demanding, more cautious. Fine. We'll talk. No mention of my well-being. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just logistics. It no longer surprised me. The next day, I stood outside the house again, but this time everything felt different. The same driveway, the same door, the same walls, but I wasn't the same person standing in front of them. I wasn't arriving with uncertainty. I wasn't hoping for understanding. I was there with purpose. Daniel opened the door before I could knock, as if he had been waiting just behind it. His expression was tight, controlled, but there was something else there too, something new. Concern. Mom, he said, stepping aside.
Come in.
I walked past him without hesitation. Claire was already in the living room, sitting upright on the couch like she was preparing for a formal discussion rather than a family conversation. The air in the room felt heavier than before, charged with something unspoken. Let's just talk calmly, she said, repeating the same words she had used before, though this time it sounded less certain. I agree, I replied, taking a seat across from them. Calm is good. Daniel sat down beside her, leaning forward slightly. The bank contacted us, he began. They mentioned something about missed payments and complications. I stopped paying, I said simply. Claire exhaled sharply. You can't just do that without telling us. I just did, I replied, meeting her gaze without raising my voice. Daniel rubbed his forehead, clearly trying to stay composed. Mom, this affects our credit, our plans, everything we've been working toward. And what about me? I asked. The question landed harder than I expected. There was a pause. A real one. Not avoidance, not dismissal, just silence. I've been paying for that house for 2 years, I continued, my voice still steady but firmer now. Living there. Supporting you. Adjusting to every change you made. And in return, I was moved to the basement and told not to make things difficult. Claire shifted uncomfortably, but Daniel didn't look away this time. That wasn't, he started. That's exactly what it was. I interrupted, not sharply, but clearly enough that he stopped speaking. Another silence followed, heavier this time. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table in front of them. These are the records, I said. Every payment. Every month. Daniel looked down at the papers, but didn't touch them. What are you asking for? He said finally. There it was. Not how do we fix this. Not what do you need. Just terms. I nodded slightly, almost to myself. I'm glad you asked. Claire crossed her arms. We're not agreeing to anything unreasonable. I'm not offering anything unreasonable, I replied. I leaned back slightly, giving myself a moment, not because I needed it, but because I wanted them to feel it. The pause. The shift. I will resume the payments, I said. Relief flickered across Daniel's face instantly, but it didn't last. Under one condition. Claire's expression hardened. Which is? I looked at both of them, making sure there was no misunderstanding. You sell the house to me. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel blinked, clearly trying to process what I had just said. Claire's reaction was faster, her disbelief almost immediate. That's not possible, she said. It is, I replied calmly. You want stability. You want her plans to move forward. This is how that happens. Daniel shook his head slightly. The house is worth much more than what's left on the mortgage. And I've already paid far more than that over the years, I said. Not just in money. Claire stood up, pacing once across the room before turning back to me. This is manipulation. No, I said quietly. This is balance. Daniel finally looked up at me fully, and for the first time, I saw something close to uncertainty in his eyes. You're serious, he said. I've never been more serious, I answered. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was shifting. And, for the first time since everything began, I wasn't the one losing ground. Daniel didn't answer me right away, and this time I didn't expect him to. The silence between us felt different now, not like avoidance, not like dismissal, but like something finally catching up to him. Claire, however, wasn't willing to sit in it for long. She let out a sharp breath and shook her head, pacing once across the living room before stopping near the window, arms tightly crossed as if holding herself together. This is unbelievable, she said. After everything we've done, this is how you repay us? I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. The narrative had already shifted in her mind. They weren't the ones who had crossed a line. I was. I had disrupted the version of reality that worked in their favor, and now they needed to reframe it quickly. What exactly have you done for me, Claire? I asked calmly. She turned sharply, clearly not expecting the question. We let you stay here. We included you. You moved me into a basement, I said, cutting through her words without raising my voice. You packed my things like I was temporary. You changed the locks. Daniel winced slightly at that, just enough for me to notice. That wasn't supposed to be permanent, he said quickly, stepping in. We just needed time to reorganize. Then why didn't you tell me? I asked. That stopped him. Because there was no good answer. The truth was simple, and we all knew it. They hadn't told me because they didn't think they needed to. Because in their version of things, my role had already been reduced to something secondary, something manageable, something that didn't require consent. I didn't come here to argue. I continued, leaning forward slightly. I came here to be clear. I'm done pretending this is normal. Claire let out a quiet, frustrated laugh. So, your solution is to take the house back? That's your idea of fairness? My solution, I said, holding her gaze steadily, is to stop being erased from something I built. Daniel looked down at the documents again, then back at me. You really won't back down on this? No, I said. There was no hesitation left in me now.
No second-guessing.
Whatever doubt had existed before had been replaced by something far more solid. He nodded slowly, almost to himself. And if we don't agree? I let the question sit for a moment before answering. Then we take it further. Legally. Claire scoffed under her breath, but I could see the shift in Daniel's posture again. He understood what that meant. Not emotionally, not fully, but practically. Delays.
Costs.
Risk. Uncertainty. Everything they had been trying to avoid. You'd really do that to your own son? He asked. The question didn't hurt the way it once would have. I wouldn't have to, I said quietly. If my own son hadn't done this to me first, that was the moment something changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. Daniel leaned back, running a hand through his hair, his composure finally slipping just a little. Claire watched him closely, clearly waiting for him to push back harder, to reassert control, but he didn't. Not immediately. How much? He asked after a long pause. Claire turned toward him sharply. Daniel. No, he said, more firmly this time. We need to understand what she's asking. I didn't rush to answer. I wanted him to sit in that decision, to feel that he had made the choice to take this seriously. The remaining balance on the mortgage, I said. That's what you sell it to me for. Claire stared at me in disbelief. That's far below market value. And I've paid far above that already, I replied. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, calculating. Not emotionally, strategically. That was who he had become. And in a strange way, that made this easier. I didn't need him to understand my feelings. I just needed him to understand the situation. "And the lien?" he asked. "It goes away," I said. "The payments resume. Everything stabilizes for both of us." "For you," Claire muttered. "For all of us," I corrected. Another long silence followed, but this one felt different. Not resistant, not hostile, just inevitable. Claire stepped closer to Daniel, lowering her voice, though not enough that I couldn't hear. "If we agree to this, we lose everything we planned." Daniel didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, "If we don't, we might lose more." That was it. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of what they had done. Just a decision based on consequences. But strangely, I was okay with that. Because this was never about making them feel sorry. It was about making them stop. "We'll need time," Daniel said finally, looking at me again. "You have until tomorrow," I replied. Claire's head snapped up. "That's not enough." "It's exactly enough," I said. "You've had 2 years of my support. I've had 1 week of clarity." Daniel held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Tomorrow." I stood up then, smoothing my coat, feeling the weight of the moment settle into something steady rather than overwhelming.
Good.
As I walked toward the door, I paused briefly, my hand resting against the familiar wood. For a second, memories flickered. Laughter, holidays, quiet evenings, a life that had once filled every corner of this place. But they didn't pull me back. They simply reminded me why I was doing this. "I'll be waiting," I said, without turning around. And then I left. The next 24 hours passed differently than I expected. I didn't pace. I didn't replay every word in my head. I didn't question myself. Instead, I helped Margaret in her garden, answered a few calls at the cafe where she volunteered, and sat quietly with a book I didn't really read. It wasn't calm in the usual sense. It was something deeper. It was certainty. When the phone finally rang the next afternoon, I already knew what the answer would be. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice more measured than before. "We've discussed it." I waited. "We'll agree," he continued. "On your terms." There it was.
No apology. No words.
But agreement. "That's the right decision," I said. Claire didn't come to the closing.
Daniel did.
He was quiet the entire time, signing documents, avoiding unnecessary conversation. When it was over, when the final paper had been signed and the house was legally mine again, he stood there for a moment as if unsure what to do next. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said finally. "It didn't have to," I replied. He nodded, but didn't argue. "I'll let Emma know she can visit," he added after a pause. "That would be nice," I said. Another silence. Then he left.
Just like that.
The first night back in the house felt still. Not empty. Not heavy. Just still. I walked through each room slowly. Not rushing. Not trying to reclaim everything at once. Some things had changed, and I let them stay that way for now. Other things I adjusted little by little, moving a chair, opening a window, placing my photos back where they belonged. Not to recreate the past, but to rebuild something new. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky fade into soft shades of blue and gold. The same sky I had seen from this spot for decades. The same air. The same quiet. But I wasn't the same. I thought about everything that had happened, not just the betrayal, but the years leading up to it, the compromises, the silence, the way I had slowly stepped back from my own life without realizing it. And then I thought about what came next, not what I had lost, but what I had taken back. The house was part of it, yes, but it wasn't the most important part. That was me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to need me. I wasn't adjusting myself to fit into someone else's plans. I wasn't asking for permission. I was simply living. And as I sat there, listening to the quiet sounds of a place that was finally mine again, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. What I felt was something far more powerful.
Peace.
Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had finally stopped allowing myself to be broken. And whatever came next, it would be mine too.